You all were so amazing in not only submitting some great questions ahead of time, but also asking some wonderful questions today. And so we're just gotta jump right into it because there's a lot and it's juicy. So there's actually one that I got here that I think is a great place to start. And it says, what has your spiritual journey been like? So we have 3 hours for each of you. So go ahead and I'll pull up the slide deck for each of you. So let's just try to make this fun, and let's see if we can. Let's see how short we can do this. See if you can how you can condense your spiritual journey into something quotable. The tweet version, you know. So you have a second. Thank you. I can go first if you need some time. Or all right, Dennis, go for it.
Okay. I would say, well, I was raised in a Catholic family and went to Catholic school all the way up to 8th grade. In 9th grade in high school, I went to Catholic high school, but they didn't like my long hair, and they didn't like a few other things, and so I ended up going to a public school. But my spiritual journey is, I mainly am a Christian Buddhist. I've studied a lot of Buddhism, and I find that being a good Buddhist makes me an even better Christian. It's all based on that.
Great. Well, that's interesting. Like Dennis, I was raised Roman Catholic, and like Dennis, I was asked to leave a Catholic high school where my sister graduated, and she was perfect, and I was not, and so the nuns asked my parents to please remove me, and they did, and I was much happier. So I went from Catholicism in my youth to metaphysics. I would say in the 1980s I started studying, and that was kind of the time of metaphysical spirituality, and I went from that study and some Eastern studies to science of mind, and I was a member of the Science of Mind community in Santa Rosa, California for many years. And so I have my feet in Christianity, but my head is in, I guess, more of the mystical area.
I grew up in a large evangelical megachurch, and I would say I would split my journey into two halves. This question asks about the spiritual journey, and I'll just label that the first half was more of the religious journey. And in that journey, it was all about adding knowledge, adding information, adding to my own status, trying to become something. And then my second half, the spiritual journey, has been all about letting go, removing, unlearning, release. Those are the words that really resonate with me in this half of my journey. So, next question. How do you get out of a depressive funk, in parentheses, not including therapy, medication, etc.? And I just want to say for this person too, I have a feeling this person isn't saying that they don't believe in therapy or medication. I think they're just saying what are some other tools that are available.
I understand this question very much. What I do when it happens to me, I just remind myself that it's always temporary for me. I know my rhythms, and I get depressed. I'm on meds, but I still get depressed. But I also realize that it doesn't stay. So I just kind of try to make it through. That's it. I just try to struggle through it. And sometimes it's really hard, even on the meds.
I understand too, because I've dealt with depression a lot of my adult life, and I agree with Dennis that when you recognize that this is temporary and it will lift, that everything has a rhythm and a cycle. Depending on your spiritual beliefs, I can also say that I am always surrounded by love. That's my personal, I'm surrounded by divine love, and that this will lift. And my favorite remedy is to go to a dog park. That's the best medicine that I have found, is to go watch a group of dogs romping and playing, who live in the moment, who know nothing but the fun that they're having in that moment.
If you can't see Dennis's shirt from the back, it's less people, more dogs. So those are the words to live by. I would say too, like the others who joined me on stage, I have my bouts with depression and anxiety. And it's interesting, this question asks, how do I get out of this depressive funk? And I would just kind of tell this person, what would it be like, just out of curiosity, what would it be like if the goal wasn't immediately just to get out of it? What if we were to say, what is this experience here to teach me? For me, in my own journey, I've found that the more I push back on depression and anxiety, the more it just pushes right back on me. So I become depressed that I'm depressed. I become anxious about the fact that I'm anxious. What if we just created a little bit of a space between us and those feelings and just said, hey, this is a feeling that's arising within my body, within my field of awareness. Don't need to attach a story to it. Don't need to say, oh, this is going on because of X, Y, and Z in my life. Just let it arise and just pay attention to it. Maybe kind of have a curiosity. What is this teaching me? What is this telling me about my journey here and now? You please?
Just if I could just jump on that, because that I like that very much. That we always think if we're going through a depressing time or a depressive time that there's something quote unquote wrong. There's something wrong with us. There's something wrong. And it's not. This is part of life. And I think that if you can hold it as saying, this is simply part of the cycle of living. You know, we have joyful times, we have depressed times, we have sorrow. This is, and if you can hold it as that, then it becomes, it's kind of how you label it, like you were saying, yeah.
You're officially released from needing to ask for permission. You can just interject, so.
I've noticed, I meditate all the time, and I meditate on mindfulness, and you would think that meditating on mindfulness and your depression would make it better. In my experience, it just makes me more depressed. I'm super mindful that I'm really depressed.
This one came in this morning. How can I support self-care and self-love, my essential self versus my ego self? Self-care and self-love, my essential self versus my ego self. That's a great question, and I would just say something that I've been encountering in my own journey is, what if we took away the verses, the essential self versus my ego self? What if we took away the adversarial framing of that? I think so often within spirituality we say, I gotta get rid of my ego. I gotta obliterate my ego. No more ego. What if we saw the ego as part of this larger holistic thing that is you? And so often in our world, in our society, the ego is in the driver's seat, and that is where the problems arise. But I don't think that we necessarily are aiming for a life completely devoid of the ego either. So maybe it's about paying attention to the relationship between your essential self and your ego self.
I agree that we could not function in the world without our ego. We could not function. We couldn't hold a job. We couldn't really do much of anything in terms of this physical reality that we live in. So it's necessary. It's essential. It's not a bad thing. But again, you want to see who's in the driver's seat. Is my ego the one that's making all the decisions? And that balance between spirit or your essential self, what you call your essential self, and your ego self should be in a balance. Ideally, it never is. It goes up and down and up and down. And so, yeah, I think that we need it. We need both, and we need to see who's driving the car.
The Buddhists believe that you need just enough ego to prevent yourself from walking in front of a bus. And I try to be really conscious of my ego. And once you start thinking about your ego in those terms, you realize, and you need to do this, you realize how much of what comes out of your mouth is ego-based. And once you start thinking about it, when you go to bed at night, think about all the conversations that you had and whether your conversation was based on your ego. wanting something or trying to build you up. I mean, you guys are completely right. You do have to balance it because you can't get rid of it completely. But I try to get rid of it completely.
We'll watch out. We'll watch out for you in the roads.
The ultimate test is on the road.
Next question. I believe in prayer and intention, and I'm wondering how others pray. So that's part one. And the second part is, do I ask for the highest good outcome, or do I ask God to intervene in a situation for an outcome that, I think would be the best? Great question. Great question.
So it depends. I don't believe in an intervening a God or a deity. I don't. That's just not part of my personal belief system. So I feel that prayer is very powerful and prayer is very effective. And having been part of the Science of Mind community, they have a style of prayer called affirmative prayer. And affirmative prayer means that you hold as truth what it is that you are praying about. For instance, if you have a friend who's sick and who has, I would hold as truth that this person is well, that they are healthy in body and mind, that they are living, that they are happy and peaceful in their lives. And I would hold that and be grateful and say, knowing that in God all is possible, everything is possible, I hold this as truth with gratitude in my heart. And so that's kind of that style of prayer and Science of Mind. I think that intention and prayer is an energetic powerhouse. I also think gratitude is even more of an energetic powerhouse. And so we pray as if it were already done with gratitude. That's just, yeah.
What's the question again?
I believe in prayer and intention, and I'm wondering how others pray. Do I ask for the highest good outcome, or do I ask God to intervene in a situation for an outcome that I think would be the best?
Okay. I generally only say gratitude prayers. Just thank you for all that I have. I will admit that while I was sitting over there, I said a prayer to God saying, please let me say at least one thing that resonates with someone. So, but basically it's always thank you.
I love that. I think this person is also curious because they're asking about how others engage. And so if you are curious, I think one way of kind of shifting your perspective on prayer, so often the way that we are taught to think about prayer is, sending requests, sending my list of what I, want, and kind of sending that outwards to God. So the directionality of prayer is out, and there's separation. There's me sending something to God. And I just would be curious, what would it be like to shift the perspective? What if it wasn't about asking, but listening? What if it was about quieting down, creating space? I think that's kind of a lot of what the Eastern kind of flipped, more meditation, more about creating a space where there's an absence of noise. I totally think that prayer can be an amazing spiritual practice, but in my own journey, I've found that prayer can become this very intellectual exercise. But I know for me, I need to get more into my body and I need to more feel. And I'm wondering if there can be such a thing as a prayer of pure feeling, like a body prayer, if you will. Ask for the highest good outcome or ask God to intervene. I think this is a great other part of the question because I feel like something that I've also questioned in my journey is, do I even know what I should be praying for? Like, I think, this would be what I want, or this would be good for me. How do I even know? So I think also that is great. I would encourage you, bring that humility, that not knowing in there, and just, that's why simpler prayers like gratitude can be so powerful, because it's just thank you for what is versus could this be? How do you strengthen your faith and continue to have faith when there are so many awful things happening in the country and the world?
That's really good because one can become overwhelmed by the amount of suffering and sorrow and pain in the world. I hold out hopefulness that we humans, like all life, are always evolving. And I try and imagine that we are evolving toward our higher selves all the time. God doesn't do, in my belief system, God doesn't do anything here. We do it to ourselves. We harm each other. We destroy each other. We are a plague upon the planet. But we also do great good and wonderful, loving acts of kindness, whether it's to one another or globally. So I always have that hope. And so I keep my faith that we are surrounded by love, by divinity, by the divine love of God all the time. And that helps us to rise up and evolve to our higher selves.
Okay. I try to, well, first of all, I'll tell a quick story. There's a monk walking down the road, and in a caged yard is let's just say a Doberman that just seems incredibly mad and wants to tear anybody apart. And it's barking like mad at this monk. The monk, being a monk, has all the love and compassion for another sentient being, that Doberman. But he doesn't go into the yard. I employ that a lot. I also employ that nothing is in control. I truly believe that God is here for us, but as far as us on earth, nothing is in control. And I don't have expectations, because when you have attachments to expectations of how things should be, it just creates massive amount of suffering for you. And so I have no expectations. I appreciate everything as it comes to me. Sure, I'm sad sometimes when I read the news, but nothing is in control, and I try to live my life that way. Nothing surprises me. I'm not attached to a single ideal.
I love those. Just to offer a little bit of a different perspective too, in the tradition that I grew up in and the way that I saw things, for so long I was led to believe that the journey of humanity was kind of headed towards some sort of climactic endpoint. A couple weeks ago we talked about the difference between cyclical and linear time. And I so often thought in linear time, like we are headed towards the end of the world. And I think that that type of thinking, religious or not, is pretty common in our world today. But what's interesting is the word apocalypse in the Greek does not mean the end of the world. It means the end of a particular era or age, and it means like a great unveiling of truth. And so I'd wonder for us, when we look around and we say, oh man, it's the end of the world, right? What if it is the end of a world that is ready to transition over into something new and something better? And the chaos that we feel is sort of those last holdouts of this old way of being. You know, so often, we as a society have this tendency and go, oh man, things were so much better when X, Y, and Z, right? But the truth is, things were not so much better for everybody, right? You go back and we have like the golden era of whatever, we think like, oh, the 50s were so great, but it's like, it wasn't great for everyone. And so we have to understand like this chaos that we see is also an unveiling of truth. It's a revealing. The things that are happening in the world today aren't necessarily new. We're just more aware. So I think buckle up, and there's something beautiful on the other side of this. That's what I have faith in.
I like what Alan Watts says about that life is more like a musical piece or a song, right? You don't listen to music thinking that the very last note will be the best note of the song. You listen to the whole song all the way through and dance throughout the whole song.
That's good. How important is it to have the answers?
Absolutely not important at all.
I was going to say the same. Not important at all.
No one has the answers.
No one has them. How do we show love and grace to people who are discriminatory against people of other races, religions, sexual orientations, genders, ability, etc.?
Once again, I avoid them. I'm serious.
They're the Doberman.
There's 8 million. Yeah, they're the Doberman. There's 8 billion people on this earth, and for anything good to come of this, we have to start with ourselves. And the Buddhists believe that once you attain enlightenment, then your job is to spread it. And we all get thousands of lifetimes to achieve this. But eventually, there will be nirvana here on earth. But it bums me out what's happening in the world. But once again, I think I'm attached to a certain idea of how things should be, and that's not how things are. So I let it go pretty quickly.
So, I think avoiding people like that, absolutely. But if you can't, say it's family members, or there are situations where really you can't avoid it, I think becoming curious is a good way to bridge that divide. Simply becoming curious and asking the person, oh, that's really interesting that you said that. Can you tell me why? Or tell me more. Now, a lot of times our own ego, sometimes if that happens to me, then I really want to get into an argument. But if you can not do that and simply become curious and find out where the other person is coming from, a lot of times they might be frightened. They might have really bad information that they might be willing to listen to, or they might just be afraid, and that might be a way to offer some grace to them by being curious about that.
I was thinking about this question because it's written, how do we show love and grace to people? In other words, how do we give them love and grace? But I was thinking, if we just ask that question in a different way, how do we show love and grace to people, as in, how do we show them what love and grace is? And really, for me, it just reminds me, it just comes back to yourself. You can't control or change another person. The only person that you can really control is yourself. And so if you are focused on creating a world of love and grace in your life as much as you possibly can, then certainly that's going to spill out into all your relationships. So I would just encourage you, focus within on being the most loving and graceful person you can be. And by proxy, you are showing that to everyone you interact with.
Can I add just a little bit? I work with ladies, drug addicts, in the recovery field. And 99% of the people that we see have extreme trauma in their backgrounds. And this always comes out as anger, all of the things described in that question. And it's really important to realize that so many people have trauma in their backgrounds. And trauma comes in many forms. But a lot of people that act out on these have these negative things to say and act negatively have trauma in their backgrounds. So in Buddhism, you try to show as much love and compassion to them. I'm the easy one at work. I always hear that the ladies take advantage of me. My other coworkers say, the ladies are taking advantage of you. And I say, I'm giving them the advantage, right? They've never had an advantage in their life. So compassion is the answer.
I've always wanted to know how our world is populated, i.e., in the beginning, God created heaven and earth. God created man from the dust of the earth and woman from the rib of man, calling them Adam and Eve. Later, Adam and Eve have children. The Bible doesn't mention God creating other people. Do Adam and Eve's children populate the whole world? So I would just say this is a good question because it really just covers a broad variety of topics. You can really just fill in the blank of why is this happening in the Bible. The Hebrew people from whom this ancient story comes from, if we look at the time, the place, the culture, the society that this story arises from, it was oral tradition. So it wasn't intended to be taken as history or science. In that time, they didn't have the concept of literalism, of historical data, of scientific data. So the story would have arisen in a culture that was primarily concerned with passing along a culture through oral tradition, through these stories and legend about where they came from. We tend to look in our society down on myth. We say, well, myth means untrue. Next week, we're going to be talking about how myth does not mean untrue. It means true in a different way, in a symbolic level. So for me, when I look at things like the Bible wisdom text, especially ancient wisdom texts, I also remember try to bring in what is the context of the culture that this comes from? What is the intent? What is like the literary context? Meaning, was this written as a history book or was it written as a image, an evocative book? And really the Bible is actually a library full of all these different stories. And so if we can pull that burden of being literally true off of the Bible, we're actually freed to take it in and appreciate it for what it is. So.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that if you can look at sacred texts, any sacred texts in any culture, as a series of metaphors and stories, then it becomes really, really interesting because the meaning becomes much more deep and much more revealing about the place, the culture at the time, because every culture has their origin stories. And they're always written in a very creative, visual, metaphorical fashion. So whatever you would want to make of the origin story in Genesis can come from an understanding, like you said, of the people of the time and what they were trying to convey.
That's a tough question for me. I tend to just look at, I know there's a God, but I also appreciate science a great deal, and I read about animal behaviors and evolution, and animal behaviors and evolution make complete sense. I mean, you can almost figure out what we're going to do next, right? What humans are going to do next. Probably die off in 1,000 years. But that said, it sounds so negative. The earth will be fine. I know we're ruining the earth, but we're only ruining it for ourselves. The earth will be fine. In 1,000 years, the Colorado River will run, and the dams that are there now will just be beautiful rapids, right? That makes me feel good. But as far as that question, I don't know. That's a hard one.
I hold on to grief as a way of holding on to my son who died. How do I let it go? It's a tough one. And I think we as human beings tend to, we are the architects of our emotions, meaning we have labeled and decided this is kind of what this emotion is. Grief is not a one-sided emotion. It's incredibly nuanced. Grief and love are sort of this beautiful mixture. One can't exist without the other. The grief could not exist without the immense love. Have you all seen that movie Inside Out? If you haven't, what's so beautiful is basically the journey that you go on is you start with these more one-dimensional emotions. And then you realize throughout the course of the movie that all the emotions that we experience, all the most formative moments in our lives are multi-layered. They're bittersweet. They contain both pain and joy, love and loss. And so I wonder, you can maybe shed some of the darkness of this grief by recognizing the larger feeling will be there forever because that love will always be there. And so maybe creating a space and recognizing it not purely as grief, but as something much more multi-layered and beautiful.
Thanks, Jake. And I also wanted to add that to me, grief is kind of like a river that you navigate when you lose someone that you love. It's not a one-time thing. It's not, it doesn't have a time clock that ticks. It is a river that you navigate. It ebbs and it flows. And to allow that, to allow the ebbing and the flowing of that process, it will heal over time in its own way. I think a lot of it is just allowing and not resisting it and thinking that, oh, I should be past this, I should be X, Y, and Z. Allow that, because as you said, the grief comes from the deep love, and there is no way we can avoid love, loss, grief, and to allow that river to flow.
My mother-in-law died a few months ago, and my father-in-law is not handling it well. He's not grieving in a healthy way. He goes down there and sits by her grave for an hour every day and talks to her. His latest thing is, do you think the casket's waterproof? Because I don't want her to be cold down there, right? This is a form of grief that is not healthy, doesn't understand the big picture. And I mean, when someone close to me dies, I just start to envision them in the trees and in the beautiful birds and the beautiful things that are happening in nature. That makes me feel good. Unfortunately, my father-in-law is so far gone that I can't even approach him and tell him these things. He's got to grieve his own way. I guess we all just grieve our own way. And the other thing is, we choose our own suffering. So, I mean, you choose how long you grieve. And after a while, it can become a heavy burden, and it affects those around you, the other people that you love. So, recognizing that we choose our own suffering, I think encourages us to grieve and then move on.
In that same vein, what is your belief about what happens to us after death?
Dog park.
I'm in.
Dog park, yeah. Eternal dog park. I don't know. I have no idea, and I don't mind not knowing. I have my story, and my story is that we return to the divine heart of everything. Love, compassion, creation. And that's just my story, and I recognize it as a story. It brings me comfort, and it's just my story. I have no idea, but I know that I did experience when my mother died. I was with my mother during her dying time, and it was quite a magical experience because, and I'll just tell a very brief. At one point, probably maybe 2 or 3 days before she died, I was sitting in the room. She was asleep, and I was just sitting there. And the room to me was alive with love. It was almost a palpable, energetic force that was flowing throughout that room. And I thought to myself in the moment, aha, so this is love. And I hold on to that because to me, that presence that was with her in her dying is what we return to.
I don't know the answer to that question, and I would say anyone that tells you they do know the answer to that question, I would be very suspicious of that person.
Run. This is a great question because I think it speaks to some of the deepest human longings for understanding that have motivated spirituality and religion for thousands and thousands of years. I'll say that I don't necessarily have a belief about what happens after death, though I have endless curiosity. I would say I probably think every day about it because I'm curious, but I don't think that we will know until we all face that journey ourselves. So I don't have a belief about what happens after death, but I do have a belief about death that I feel very, very, very strong about. And it's that death is a transition. And we all face transitions in our life every single day. Every time we go to bed, we're transitioning from one day to the next. And I believe death certainly is the biggest transition we'll face. And we don't know what's on the other side of it, but we also never know what's on the other side of any transition that we ever face. And when I'm coming to a crossroads, to a transition moment in my life, what I've tried to learn, and it's very hard to do, what I've tried to learn is to trust and to let go. To trust and to let go. And so far, that's served me pretty well. And so that's the approach I want to take all the way through to the end. So
the last thing I would add is the Buddhists believe that death is the greatest teacher, because it happens to everyone. No one gets out. And if you are attached to your life to the extent that you're worried about death every single day, it can cause great suffering. But if you are not attached to your life, if you realize that nothing is in control, it makes you appreciate this very moment.
I'm going to end on a spicy one. With the change of pastors at Aldea, it feels like we have gotten farther away from Jesus. Sometimes it feels like we are attending a family therapy group session on Sundays and not a service. What exactly is the direction of Aldea these days? I'm confused. It doesn't sound like you're confused at all. You've got it pretty right on, pretty spot on. No, I love Jesus, and I think I love Jesus now more than I ever have. Jesus was essential to my own spiritual journey, and I know for so many others, Jesus has been an important source of an incredible teaching and a motivation to live this fulfilling, wonderful, self-sacrificial life of unconditional love. But when you're asking about what is the direction of Aldea, I think what you're asking is, what is the ultimate kind of goal? What is our purpose as a community? And I know for me, just speaking from me, this is a community informed by all of our directions and all of our paths. But for me, this community is about creating a space and supporting people as they walk their spiritual path, whatever that looks like. Creating fulfilling, meaningful, connection-filled, loving lives. And I don't think that Jesus is the only way to achieve that. So my ultimate goal here is not to create more Jesus followers. It's to support people on their journey. And if being a Jesus follower is how you navigate your spiritual path, I'm all for that, and I will support you in that. And if it's not, I will support you in whatever journey you are taking. When you ask about direction, and this is just something that really I've been thinking a lot about. So often we're pointed outwards. We're looking for the next thing that will fulfill us or complete us, even if that's a religion or a teaching. But I think something that we've overlooked so often, that I think the spiritual traditions are actually pointing us towards, is to go inward. And so the direction of Aldea, I think it's in. Go inside of yourself. There you will find God. So hopefully this is a space where you can deeply explore the far reaches of who you really are, and through that, you will be able to continue to walk the path in a fulfilling way. No one needs to defend me, but you're welcome to add to that if you want. So,
I don't preach, but I believe that God only wants one thing from us, and that is to have a personal relationship with you. And I find that I feel good when I leave here. When I meditate, I pray at the same time. So whatever you're doing helps me.
I know in the Science of Mind tradition, Jesus of Nazareth is referred to as the master teacher. And so the teachings of Jesus are used in that context of him being a master teacher, but he's one master teacher, and there have been others on the earth. And so I found that appealed to me personally to see the teachings of Jesus in that light, not as an end, but as someone who is pointing us in other directions.
And I find the teachings of Jesus come alive to me even more when we look at them alongside of the other great teachings and we see that golden thread of truth weaved throughout all of them. So that's something that we like to do here, and we love it. So, yeah. Thank you, everybody, for your wonderful questions. Thank you to our panelists.